He had been there before, not on February 1st, not the night he took her. 3 weeks earlier. Same mask, same deliberate movement, same approach to the front door, but no backpack, no weapon visible. He stood at Nancy Guthrie's door on what investigators believe was January 11th, 21 days before she disappeared, and then he left. Think about what that means for a moment. Because the way this case has been presented to the public from the beginning is built around a specific image: a masked stranger, armed, arriving in the night to take an elderly woman from her home for ransom. A professional, someone who had never been there before and moved through the case like a ghost. No car, no traceable emails, no DNA match. A perfect crime by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But if he was there 3 weeks before the abduction, he wasn't a stranger passing through. He had a reason to go to that door. And then he went back. Former FBI agent Jonny Grusing spent 25 years in the FBI's Denver division investigating violent crimes, missing persons cases, and serial killers. When he looked at the publicly available evidence in this case, the blood on the porch and driveway, the camera footage, the gun held not like a weapon, but like a prop, the specific way the suspect approached the door, he offered a theory that I think deserves far more attention than it has received. He said the suspect may have had a personal grievance against Nancy Guthrie, and he may have lured her onto that porch deliberately. That is a fundamentally different kind of crime than what the ransom framework describes. And if Grusing is right, it changes everything about who investigators should be looking for. If you've been following this case and you want every development covered the day it breaks, subscribe to the Obscure Report right now. Turn on notifications. What I'm about to lay out is the most underreported angle in 67 days of coverage. Let's start with what we actually know about the night of February 1st, because the publicly available evidence, when you look at it piece by piece, rather than through the ransom lens, tells a story that doesn't fit the professional kidnapper profile as cleanly as most coverage suggests. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona. On the evening of January 31st, her son-in-law dropped her off at her home at approximately 9:50 p.m. She went inside. That was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy before her disappearance. In the early hours of February 1st, something happened at that front door. Blood was found on Nancy's front porch and trailing down the driveway. DNA testing confirmed it was Nancy's. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Barden analyzed the blood evidence publicly and said the pattern suggested Nancy was bleeding from the hands or face, the specific type of spatter consistent with drops falling from the nose or mouth. She was either unable or didn't attempt to stop the bleeding as she moved from the front of the house toward the driveway. Here is the detail that Jonny Grusing focused on. The blood is on the porch, outside, not, as far as has been publicly confirmed, inside the home. Nancy came to the door. She opened it. Whatever happened to her began outside, not inside. She was not grabbed from her bed. She was not taken from inside the house while she slept. She went to that door. Why does someone who is alone at night, at 84 years old, open their front door? Because someone knocked. Because someone rang the bell. Because whoever was standing on that porch gave her a reason to come out. Grusing's analysis of the surveillance footage added another layer. The gun the suspect was carrying. He told Fox News he believed it may have been a prop. Look at the footage. The weapon is not held like someone who is about to force entry. It's not pointed. It's not in a ready position. It's there, but it's being used as a display, not a tool. Grusing suggested the suspect may have been shielding himself from being seen, ringing the doorbell or knocking, getting Nancy to come to the door. Not to force his way in, but to confront her about something. A grievance. A specific reason for being there that had nothing to do with a professional ransom operation. A professional kidnapper does not knock on the door and wait for the victim to open it. A professional kidnapper controls the environment. They create the conditions for the abduction. They don't stand at a lit doorbell camera and hope the target comes outside. The professional approach involves force, surprise, overwhelming the victim before they can react. That's not what the evidence describes. The evidence describes someone who got Nancy to come to that door willingly, or at least curiously. Someone whose presence at that door was not immediately alarming enough for an 84-year-old woman to call 911 before opening it. That takes knowledge. Either knowledge of Nancy specifically, of how to get her to open the door, or a pretense compelling enough that she didn't immediately recognize the threat. And if you're finding this analysis useful and you want this channel to keep investigating every angle of this case, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I cover every new development here. Now let's talk about January 11th. The FBI released 2 images of the suspect at Nancy's front door. In the image from the night of the abduction, February 1st, the suspect is masked, wearing a backpack, and armed. That image is well known. What received far less coverage is the second image. The same masked individual appears to have been at Nancy's front door approximately 3 weeks earlier, on or around January 11th. In this earlier image, there is no backpack, no visible weapon. He is simply standing at the door. Google told investigators they could not definitively confirm the date of that image. The Nest doorbell camera metadata was not conclusive, but investigators specifically canvassed neighbors and asked them to review their home security footage going back to January 1st. They asked about specific dates, and January 11th was one of them. That is not how investigators request footage unless they have a reason to believe something significant happened on that date. Behavioral analysis of the 2 appearances produces a specific profile. First visit: no backpack, no weapon, possibly an approach visit. Testing whether Nancy was home. Testing whether she would come to the door. Testing the camera position and coverage. Second visit, 3 weeks later. Backpack, weapon, camera covered with branches. The escalation between the first and second appearance is not random. It is the arc of someone who visited, gathered information, and returned with a plan built on what they learned. Former FBI agent Jason Pack noted that the preparation and planning evident between the 2 visits suggests more sophisticated criminal activity than a random arrival. But I want to push past sophisticated for a moment, because that word keeps being used to describe this suspect, and I think it slightly misframes what the evidence actually shows. A sophisticated professional kidnapping operation does not involve standing at a doorbell camera on 2 separate occasions. A sophisticated operation involves surveillance from a distance, knowledge obtained through other means, and an extraction plan that minimizes direct exposure to cameras and witnesses. This suspect was directly at the front door on 2 occasions, captured on the homeowner's own camera both times. That is not the profile of someone with professional kidnapping experience. That is the profile of someone who had a specific reason to be at that specific door and whose operational discipline was limited by their personal involvement in the situation. Personal involvement is the key phrase, and it's what leads directly to Grusing's grievance theory. Let me explain how behavioral profiling approaches the question of motive in a case like this, because it's different from how motive is usually discussed in true crime coverage. Most public discussions of motive in this case have focused on the ransom as the motive. $6 million, Bitcoin, payment deadlines. The ransom is the motive, so the kidnapper is someone motivated by money, therefore the kidnapper is a professional or near-professional criminal with financial objectives. But FBI behavioral profiling doesn't start with the stated demand, it starts with the behavior. And the behavior in this case, the prior visit, the doorbell approach, the luring rather than forcing, is more consistent with personal motivation than financial motivation. In documented kidnapping cases where the primary motivation is financial, the victim is typically selected based on accessibility and resources. The relationship between kidnapper and victim is instrumental. The victim is a means to the money. There's no prior relationship, no grievance, no personal history. The abduction is efficient precisely because it's impersonal. Get the leverage, make the demand, collect the payment, release or exit. Personal exposure to the victim is minimized because personal exposure is risk. What Grusing is pointing at is a different profile, someone for whom Nancy Guthrie herself was the point. Not her daughter's fame or her daughter's money specifically, but Nancy. Her presence at that door. Whatever happened on that porch. The ransom demand, under Grusing's framework, could be a secondary layer, an attempt to profit from a situation that was initially motivated by something else entirely. Or it could be a cover story, a way to frame a personal crime as a professional one. This matters enormously for the investigation because it changes the search parameters completely. A professional kidnapper with no prior connection to Nancy could be almost anyone with criminal experience and financial motivation operating anywhere in the region. But someone with a personal grievance against Nancy Guthrie is someone who was part of her world, who knew her, who had a history with her, who had been to that door or wanted to be at that door for reasons that predate February 1st. The investigators' request for footage going back to January 1st tells you they were thinking along these lines. You don't ask neighbors to go back a month unless you're trying to establish a pattern of presence, unless you believe the suspect was in that neighborhood more than once, for reasons that extend beyond the night of the abduction. Now let me bring in two other pieces of publicly available evidence that reinforce this theory and that I haven't seen connected to Grusing's analysis in any coverage. The first is the retired FBI agent who analyzed the blood evidence and concluded Nancy was likely carried out by two people. The blood drops suggest her head was tilted forward or to the side as she was moved. She was not walking. She was being carried. This requires at minimum two people, one to hold her from behind, one to support her weight. A personal grievance crime committed by a single individual with a specific beef against Nancy Guthrie would more likely be a one-person operation. But organized grievance, a group of people with a shared interest in confronting or harming Nancy, is not outside the framework. Families have grievances. Business partners have grievances. Neighbors have grievances. The person who rang the doorbell and the person who carried her to the vehicle may have shared a motivation. The second piece is the ransom notes themselves. The FBI confirmed that two of the letters sent to a Tucson television station and to TMZ are genuine. They originated from whoever actually took Nancy. Those letters contained interior details about the crime scene that were not publicly available. That knowledge of interior details is significant. It suggests either the suspect entered the home or had information about the home's interior from a source who had been inside. A stranger executing a professional ransom kidnapping typically gains interior knowledge through surveillance or floor plan research. Someone with a personal connection to Nancy or to someone connected to Nancy might have been inside the home legitimately at some prior point. Let me lay out three versions of the personal grievance theory because there's more than one way this framework fits the evidence. Version 1. The grievance is direct. The suspect had a personal conflict with Nancy Guthrie herself. He went to her door on January 11th because he wanted to confront her. For reasons we don't know. A dispute, a history, something that made him believe he had been wronged by her specifically. He wasn't ready that first visit. He left. He came back on February 1st with a backpack and a weapon, and the situation escalated in a way that produced the outcome the evidence describes. The ransom demand that followed was not the original plan. It was an improvised attempt to extract value from a situation that had already started for a different reason. Version 2. The grievance is indirect. The suspect had no personal relationship with Nancy herself, but had a grievance against Savannah Guthrie, or against the Guthrie family's status, wealth, or visibility. Nancy was targeted not because of who she was, but because of who her daughter is. The prior visit was reconnaissance, checking access, checking whether an elderly woman living alone could be approached without resistance. The gun as prop rather than weapon fits here too. He needed Nancy to come to the door, not to flee or call for help. The ransom demand under this version is the primary objective, but the motivating factor is personal, directed at Savannah, executed through her mother. Version 3. The grievance is professional. Someone in Nancy's orbit, a former employee, a contractor, a neighbor with a business dispute, had a financial grievance that became personal. The ransom demand is real and financially motivated, but the specific target selection came from personal knowledge and access. This version bridges the personal grievance theory and the professional ransom theory. The money is the goal, but the path to the money runs through a personal connection that told the suspect Nancy was accessible, alone, and valuable as leverage. All three versions share a common element. The suspect is not a random professional kidnapper who selected Nancy Guthrie from a list of wealthy targets and executed a flawless extraction. The suspect is someone whose connection to this case is personal, someone who had a reason to be at that door. And there is one more detail I want to examine before we get to where the investigation stands, because it adds a layer to the personal grievance framework that hasn't received the attention it deserves. The suspect came back to that door having been captured on camera the first time. He knew about the camera, or he discovered it during the first visit. His response on February 1st was to cover the camera with branches before approaching, not to avoid the property entirely, not to choose a different target or a different approach method, to return to the same door, to the same camera, and to cover it. That decision reflects a specific kind of commitment to this particular address. A professional kidnapper who discovered a target's home had a Nest doorbell camera would evaluate whether the operational risk was worth it. A person with a specific reason to be at that door, a grievance, a plan, something at that address that couldn't be substituted with a different address, would cover the camera and come back anyway. The branches over the camera lens are not the behavior of someone for whom Nancy Guthrie was interchangeable. They are the behavior of someone for whom Nancy Guthrie specifically was the point. As of day 67, no suspect has been publicly identified. No arrest has been made. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home remains unmatched in CODIS, and the mixed sample presents technical challenges that investigators are still working through. The gloves found 2 miles from the home were traced to a restaurant worker with no connection to the case. The Bitcoin wallet in the ransom notes has not been traced. The TMZ informant remains unidentified. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can be submitted at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. If you know someone who had a conflict with Nancy Guthrie, a dispute, a grievance, a falling out that happened in the months or years before February 1st, that information matters. If you know someone who was in the Catalina foothills area in January who expressed unusual interest in Nancy Guthrie or in Savannah Guthrie's family, who had access to information about Nancy's home or routine that they shouldn't have had, call. Here is the question I want to leave you with. And I want to hear your answer in the comments because this community has been sharper on this case than most professional coverage. Jonny Grusing's grievance theory changes the suspect profile from stranger to someone who was part of Nancy's world. If that's correct, if this crime was motivated by something personal, then someone in Nancy's life, or in the life of someone close to Nancy, knows who had a reason to go to that door. They may not know they know. A conflict that seemed minor, a dispute that someone mentioned in passing, an interaction that felt off but not criminal. If the suspect had a personal grievance against Nancy, there is a trail of human knowledge about that grievance that exists somewhere. It hasn't surfaced yet. The question is why? Is it because no one has made the connection? Or is it because someone has made the connection and hasn't said anything? Leave your theory in the comments. I read every single one on this case. Subscribe to the Obscure Report and turn on notifications. 67 days in, there is still no suspect named. But the evidence, when you look at it through the right lens, is telling a story. He had been there before. He came back. He knew that door. The question is how.